So we have a legacy sequel directed by Ridley Scott 20-something years later to one of my favorite movies of all time. What could go wrong?
Everything!
I was scared when I watched Gladiator II. Let's discuss.
I remember that day. I never forgot it. That a slave could take revenge against an emperor.
After his home is conquered by the tyrannical emperors who now lead Rome, Lucius is forced to enter the Colosseum and must look to his past to find strength to return to the glory of Rome, to its people. This movie is rated R for strong, bloody violence. That's what I like to hear as a fan of the first Gladiator, and specifically the action scenes and sequences. Yes, they're a little choppy if you go back and watch it today, but who cares? They are shot immaculately. The score, everything about that first movie, man, it's just handled in such an epic way. I love this time period. I love spending time in this time period. And I love when you get a character like what Russell Crowe was able to provide us in that first film that you're so invested in. Okay, so it's a hard R-rated movie. The stakes are even higher this time around. I'm not saying it's deeper. I'm not saying it's a better written movie. I'm just saying it's bigger, right? There are more things going on in Gladiator 2 compared to Gladiator 1. And this time we have Paul Mescal in the lead role, who's playing Lucius, the young boy from the first movie. Now, there are some things they do with his character that I would consider spoiler territory. I'm not going to talk about that. Watching Gladiator 2 is a bit frustrating because the entire time, and I can't help it, this is the way my brain works, I just want to compare it to Gladiator 1. And that's partially because I love Gladiator 1 so much, but I'm sorry, when you get a legacy sequel, that's what you're going to do. Now, I did the same thing with Top Gun Maverick, except I much prefer Top Gun Maverick to Top Gun, so I was comparing it in a way, this is better, this is more exciting. With Gladiator 2, it was kind of the opposite, right? I kept comparing it and thinking to myself, well, this is not quite as good. Paul Mescal doesn't quite have what Russell Crowe managed to provide. The score is good. It's not quite as good as the first. The storyline is interesting, but maybe there's a few too many things going on, whereas the first movie, I didn't feel that way. And so that's just how my brain was wired throughout this entire film. But I learned as the movie progressed to start to put those things by the wayside, because that's not a fun way to watch a movie. I'm blaming myself here.
You idiot.
And thus, I stopped comparing this sequel to the magnificent film that came before and started looking at it as its own thing. Now, again, trying to do that is still difficult because you have our main character who starts out in the midst of a battle. Something tragic happens. He gets thrust into being a gladiator in Rome, and that sounds pretty similar to the first movie, but it does go in a few different directions, and handling the political side of things was very interesting here. One character in particular that makes it more interesting, one who's kind of floating on both sides. You don't know his role in the beginning. He gives Lucius a couple of interesting pep talks along the way, and that is Denzel Washington, who is just chewing every scene up. He's really freaking good in this movie. And I've seen a couple of reviews like, it just kind of seems like he's not trying to maybe immerse himself into this world like some of the other actors did. And I get that, but I'm just a big Denzel Washington fan, and I was really digging what he was doing, again, chewing up the scenery. And you look at a performance of his like The Tragedy of Macbeth, to where he just takes that kind of dialogue and just eats it up, and he's just so much better than anyone else on screen with him. No offense to everyone else in this movie, but it's Denzel Washington.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
A couple of other newcomers here. Pedro Pascal. We know how good he is. I loved his character arc in the movie. One of the supporting characters that I was actually really on board with, and I was okay with the allotted time that we were giving him, along with Denzel Washington. Then you have Fred Hetchinger? I should have looked it up. I'm sorry. And Joseph Quinn. Now, they are playing two very similar characters, but they're playing them stylistically a little differently. I do believe Fred's performance was maybe a little too over the top for that character's own good compared to Joseph Quinn's that is slightly over the top, but handling it in a different way. I don't know if it's because Joseph Quinn is a more established actor. Maybe he's not, but that's just kind of how it felt to me. And so, but this movie spends a lot of time in many places throughout the first 30 minutes of the film, and I was getting a little nervous because I'm like, all right, the first movie, as long as it is, technically doesn't feel that way. It never feels like it's meandering. It never feels like it doesn't know what it wants to do, and we can feel that in the way that Crowe's character was written. I look at the lead character in this movie. While the intentions are good there, Paul is doing kind of what he needs to do and is required to do, he's never given that moment or that series of moments or even that full emotional connection that we get from Crowe's character in the first. And I think that's one of the differences here, the distinction between those two, and how I was so in with the lead of that first movie. Like, yes, everything you say rocks me to my core, and I'm feeling it in every moment.
I'm feeling a warm spot. Sorry.
I've seen a lot of people say he's miscast. I just think a lot of people are comparing him to Russell Crowe, and that's almost unfair to do, not only because of how established of an actor he was at the time, Paul is amazing as well, but also because I just think that character's better written. I think the writing is better for the lead of Gladiator as opposed to Gladiator II. And that's not to say he's bad at all. I was in with him during multiple moments in this movie. The situation that he's in towards the middle of the film and how he gets there is maybe not just as tragic, but still kind of tragic. And there are some moments with he and Pedro Pascal's character when they're doing the gladiator stuff, and something very emotional there that was awesome. I love the way that was handled. Connie Nielsen's presence in this movie absolutely felt. Some returning, not fully returning characters, but like returning moments and ideas and themes and the comparisons. I saw somebody on Twitter compared this to like The Force Awakens. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's a sequel and some similar things and a similar main character circumstance. I get it, but at the same time, and this hurts me to say this because I loved The Force Awakens, but this doesn't feel like as much of a cash grab as that idea does. Oh, let's bring back the themes and the circumstance of the character and some of those iconic moments from the score. We've got a new composer here who I think does a nice job, brings some new elements, but we also have some similar themes coming in from that first movie. And the idea behind that is ultimately, yeah, we're going to remind people of the first film, but inherently, with how this movie handles it, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I really did feel like I was back in that world. That was my fear. I'm like, I want to feel like I'm back where I was in the early 2000s, watching that movie over and over again every time I got the opportunity. And I felt that. Say what you will about how much is going on and the fact that it doesn't find its focus for the first act of the movie. Once it does find its focus, once I started to care more about Mescal's character and his role in this entire thing, which is a massive plot point of the movie, also how Denzel Washington's character becomes more of a factor with where he goes throughout the film. And so all of these elements started to come together, but I think the real standout to Gladiator II is it's more brutal, it's bloodier, it is more intense. I think the action sequences are better. Yeah, it's bigger. Austin, bigger's not better. Well, sometimes it is, okay? I think Gladiator is big enough, okay? It's average bigness, and that is okay. They're doing all kinds of stuff. They're riding rhinoceroses. They're throwing water in here. You've got sharks with frickin' laser beams on their frickin' heads.
And that is to have sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
They don't go that far. Admittedly, some of the CGI with the animals wasn't great, but with the historians complaining about some things going on in this movie like they wouldn't have done, I'm just like, I don't care. If you're a big history buff, I see how you would care. I personally do not. And so, suspension of disbelief, you kind of get that way at a point in this film, and I'm like, whatever, man. Let's see what we can do with it. And the action's great. It's epic, man. It's brutal. Every punch is felt. Every stab kind of hurt. Every slit of the throat was like, ooh, that's brutal. And what they do with the arrows, these guys got good aim, man. Somebody bring some stormtroopers in and teach them how these guys aim with the arrows, because they're pretty good. And again, some of the CGI is a little shaky, but ultimately, it looks great, man. It is grand. It has some of that grit that I was hoping for. The production design is magnificent. It captures you with its atmosphere, and it doesn't really ever let you loose visually. And the sound design, the score, all of that plays into just making an experience. And that's what I'm looking for from Ridley Scott, because Ridley Scott just hasn't done it in a little bit, right? I enjoyed The Last Duel when I was doing my short. I kind of forgot about that, but I really enjoyed The Last Duel. That's the last movie that I'm thinking of, like, oh, he's still got it. Other than that, it's just been shaky, man. It's been so up and down, and I haven't really, even Napoleon, like, yeah, it's epic, and it's long.
That's what she said.
Way too long, but I'm not feeling it from Ridley. And I want to go back to Gladiator times when he's just crushing it with every movie, even like The Martian I'm a big fan of, but this kind of goes back to his roots, and he feels like a young filmmaker at heart. I know he's getting older, he's aging, there's some things going on in there to where I'm like, yeah, you could have done that a bit better, the script could have been better, whatever. But you're watching this, there's an energy, an infectious energy to Gladiator II that I frankly haven't felt with a lot of movies this year, and that's a good thing.
You did it! Congratulations!
You know, ultimately, this is kind of my cup of tea. It's one of those movies that just has what I am looking for in a film. It's brutal, it's big, it's kind of epic, has great atmosphere, and I love the cast, right? I'm a guy who loves the first Gladiator, tried my best to keep from making those comparisons, even though it's hard, but that kind of helped my experience once I said, you know what? Let's see what you got by yourself. I know you'll never live up to the standards of the first, and it doesn't. Oh, that sounds bad. Will I ever live up to my wife's standards? What are we talking about?
We don't care.
Let me tell you something.
We don't care.
Look, I've blabbed enough. I'm watching Wicked, so that review's coming soon, and Ryan and I are going to dive into this in detail on the brand new Movie Mode podcast episode coming your way this weekend, and we may have a guest. If you have a guess on the guest, leave a comment, and the rest will come. Oh, and drop a like if you want to see a Ridley Scott ranking. I kind of want to do that, so if you want to see it, I'll do it. While it's hard to refrain from comparing Gladiator II to the original, especially when certain integral elements may not live up to those lofty standards, there is more than enough here that warrants this film's existence. The action is bigger, bloodier, and more brutal. The production design is immaculate, and you are immediately pulled back into this stunning world. Lucius doesn't quite live up to Crow's Maximus, but he has his moments, as does this movie. So many entertaining moments. It definitely slows down at times, but that gives us the chance to kind of focus up, which this movie needs to do at points because there's a lot going on. But it never felt like I was there for a long time. That's my big issue with some Ridley Scott movies as of late. And so, where does this rank on your Ridley Scott list, and where does it rank on the year for you? I would love to know. Thank you for watching this video. Coming soon, Wicked, Movie Mode, what else? Arcane, something else. Who knows? I'm gonna go hug my wife.